Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the very important Ming Dynasty and the Purépecha Empire. The Ming Dynasty is the last imperial dynasty, Han Dynasty of the Han people, and the Purépecha Empire was the second largest empire in Mesoamerica at the time of the Spanish conquest. So two empires we cannot neglect and are very important also to cover in terms of our broader history of the world. As well, in the structure of this series, we'll highlight a specific leader from each empire. So from the Ming Dynasty, we will highlight Chu Yuan-Shan. Pardon me for my pronunciation. I'm trying to do it. I have practiced this and trying to do it as best as possible, but at the same time, I'm not a native speaker. And as well, I imagine many viewers or listeners might not be native speakers as well, so perhaps it might even be more accessible if I'm pronouncing it somewhat wrong anyways. And as for the leader of the Purépecha Empire, we will highlight Sim Sin Cha Tangaxuan II, or Tangaxuan II, we will call him. That will be the structure of this episode. So without further ado, we will begin with the first empire. So the Ming Dynasty was spanned from 1368 to 1644 CE Common Era, and was one of the most pivotal periods in Chinese history, characterized by its cultural brilliance, economic prosperity, and eventual decline, as we shall see. Therefore, we seek to find a history of its rise and fall will be our common structure of all empires we have covered. As for some further background information, so the Ming Dynasty, also known as officially the Great Ming or Da Ming, was an imperial dynasty in China, ruling from 1368 to 1644, as mentioned, following the collapse of the Mongol-led Yuan-Dynasty. So we've covered in the Mongol empires, the successor empires of the Mongol Empire, one of which was the Yuan-Dynasty. So please refer to our Mongol episode to cover that history. So, but nonetheless, this Yuan-Dynasty was ruling over this region, following as a successor state of the Mongol Empire, and the Ming Dynasty would come to replace it in the region. The Ming Dynasty, as mentioned, was the last imperial dynasty of China ruled by the Han people, the majority ethnic group of China today. Although the primary capital of Beijing fell in 1644 to a rebellion led by Li Shicheng, who established the short-lived Shun Dynasty, numerous rump states ruled remnants of the Ming imperial family, collectively called the Southern Ming, which survived until 1662. So we can continue it also up until 1644 is the date we have also on the slide. But nonetheless, Beijing was captured before this by Li Shicheng in a rebellion in 1644. But nonetheless, it continued in its rump state, and the imperial family still to some extent existed until 1662. So, starting with the rise of the Ming Dynasty, starting with the overthrow of the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty in 1368 CE. So the Ming Dynasty emerged in the aftermath of the collapse of the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty, as mentioned. Chu Yuan-Shan, who we'll highlight as a specific biography in this episode, a former Buddhist monk and rebel leader, played a crucial role in overthrowing the Mongols. So sort of a founding figure and leading a rebellion over and forming, as we shall see, his own dynasty. He established himself as the Hongwu Emperor, is another name we will refer to him as, founding the Ming Dynasty and establishing Nanjing at the time, or Nanqing as the capital at the time. The capital will later change to Beijing, as we shall see, which is currently the capital of the People's Republic of China. As for consolidation of power under the Ming Dynasty, Emperor Hongwu, or the Hongwu Emperor, implemented several administrative reforms to consolidate his power, including centralizing authority, establishing a national military system, much like a standing army, and centralization of power through having a military or a national military system, and initiating land reforms to redistribute land to the present. So a common theme, even as we've seen in previous Chinese dynasties, is the redistribution of wealth, and as perhaps we might even see under certain ideologies of communism. As for the construction of the Forbidden City, the very important landmark and very important site in Beijing still to this day was produced under the Ming Dynasty. So the third Ming emperor, known as Yongle, moved the capital to Beijing and constructed the iconic Forbidden City, symbolizing the dynasty's power and grandeur, a place I'd very much like to be able to visit someday. As for maritime expeditions as well during the Ming Dynasty, under Yonglei's reign, the third emperor, China embarked on ambitious maritime expeditions led by Admiral Zheng, or Z-H-E-N-G. Zhang He was his name. These voyages aimed to showcase Chinese power and establish tributary relationships with neighboring states. So at this time, China became a very significant naval power, both in terms of military presence, but also in terms of trade. As for the zenith of the Ming Dynasty, starting with its cultural flourishing. So the Ming Dynasty witnessed a cultural flourishing of arts and culture, with advancements in literature, painting, porcelain production, and agriculture during its peak. Ming porcelain, known for its exquisite craftsmanship, became highly sought after in international trade, so even down as far as the Silk Road, making it up into Europe. As for economic prosperity during this time, economic prosperity expanded during the Ming Dynasty, driven by agricultural innovation. So this is where we see population significantly increasing in this region and globally as well, but particularly in this region. Whereas many of the previous dynasties, although perhaps ruling over similarly large regions, their populations were significantly smaller. And this has been sort of the earliest dynasties were creating the floodgates. The later dynasties were creating the irrigation, and now it seems like things are starting to get up to steam or up to high production, at least in terms of supporting a large population and economy. Furthermore, this economic growth was driven also by commercial growth and increased trade along the Silk Road and maritime roads. So they had, not only was the Silk Road a huge economic advantage that did not always exist, but also there's also this added maritime trade as well. As for expansion of the Great Wall, so the Ming emperors oversaw the expansion and reinforcement of the Great Wall to defend against nomadic incursions in the north, particularly the Mongols. So the Great Wall had been produced over many of the previous dynasties that we've covered, and very long passed into history. However, the vast majority, or a lot of the volume of the Great Wall was produced during the Ming Dynasty. It came later, though. They had access to better technology and a larger population, however, but nonetheless, it was a larger contribution in volume. And as for creating the wall, they were the ones who rebelled against the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. So therefore, they had a lived experience with, or at least an early recollection of the risks of the threats of the nomadic empires, or the barbarians they called them. As for the decline and fall of the Ming Dynasty, so starting with fiscal mismanagement. The later years of the Ming Dynasty were marked by fiscal mismanagement, exacerbated by corruption, extravagant spending, and military campaigns against Mongols and Japanese pirates. So perhaps engaging in unnecessary battles that were not producing much, but maybe these battles were necessary. Maybe they had to prevent the pirates to maintain their economy, which was already on the decline, or perhaps they had to defend against the Mongols despite their economy already declining. But nonetheless, there was broader fiscal mismanagement, allegedly. This led to financial strain and increased taxation on the peasantry. So where they started perhaps giving redistribution to the peasants, now they're sort of taking back from the peasants by taxing them once again, or increasing the taxation on them. As for social unrest, widespread social unrest at this period erupted due to economic hardship, famines, and corruption. Peasant uprisings such as the Red Turban Rebellion and Li Shicheng's led revolt destabilized the empire. So Li Shicheng, as we mentioned, perhaps led the leading rebellion that in large part led to the decline of the Ming Dynasty. Further to the Manchu invasion. In 1644, the Manchu-led Qin Dynasty, or Qing, or Qing Dynasty, invaded China, seizing Beijing and forcing the last Ming emperor, Cheng Chen, to commit suicide. So that was led by the Manchu-led Qing Dynasty, Qing, captured Beijing and formally gave our 1644 formal end date of the Ming Dynasty. But as we shall see, a rump state or part of the imperial family remained for a period after, up until 1662. As for the fall of the Ming Dynasty marked the end of the Han Chinese rule in China and the beginning of the Manchu domination under the Qing Dynasty, or Qing Dynasty. As for the legacy, however, of the Ming Dynasty, despite its eventual collapse, the Ming Dynasty left a lasting impact on Chinese culture, art, and society. Its architectural marvels, such as the Forbidden City, the Great Wall of China, and continue to be celebrated as symbols of China's rich history. Additionally, Ming-era literature, poetry, and philosophy remain influential to this day. So very, very important and fascinating empire and period of history, both from overcoming a previous existing empire, the Yuan Dynasty, or the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty, or essentially the Mongol Empire, and then to the Qin Dynasty, or the Qin Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, which eventually overpassed them, Manchu-led. So fascinating period of history, at least in my opinion. As to highlight a specific leader, we have the Hongwu Emperor, also known as Chu Yuanchang. So one of the most important rulers of the Ming Dynasty was Chu Yuanchang, known as the Hongwu Emperor. Therefore, we'll seek to find a biography of his life. So the Hongwu Emperor, who was born on the 21st of October, 1328, I believe that makes him a Libra, or perhaps, I might even be wrong about that, maybe a Sagittarius. And dying on the 24th of June in 1398. Also known as by his temple name as the Emperor Taichu of Ming. His personal name was Chu Yuanchang, and his courtesy name was Guori, and he was the founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty, so quite an important achievement. Many have been called the Great over time. I myself might want to attribute the name Great to this one as well, but this has not formally been done, or done within his lifetime as I know. But and he reigned from 1368 to 1398. As for his early life and rise to power, so his birth and childhood, Chu Yuanchang was born into a poor peasant family, so perhaps quite a minority in terms of significant leaders. I'd say the majority have been through hereditary, right? Then secondary, some came from noble families and sort of came perhaps a tribal leader and came to be the leading family, but it seems to be quite unlikely for them to come from peasants. So this is quite an exception here, but not undone before, as we've seen. And he was born into a family in 1328 in the Anhui province in China. His parents died when he was young, so another added disadvantage perhaps, leaving him orphaned and impoverished. So perhaps as bad as it can get. That's sort of an archetypical story of the Oliver Twist, for example, or David Copperfield, one of my favorite books. As for becoming a monk, so at the age of 16, Chu entered a monastery to become a Buddhist monk, so perhaps a relatively conservative career path. However, he left the monastery a few years later due to famine and joined a group of rebels led by the Red Turban Movement, which opposed the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty. So quite a radical shift from going from a monk and then leaving due to famine and join a rebellion movement against the leading state, against the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty. He himself must be noted was most likely of Han origin. As for the leadership in the Red Turban Rebellion, so Chu quickly rose through the ranks of the Red Turbans due to his military acumen and leadership skills, so perhaps not formally trained in these, but gained it through through action, and perhaps through a relatively young age too. He adopted the name Hongwu and became one of the movement's most prominent commanders. So seems to be not always, but a lot of great leaders we've covered have sort of changed their name at periods of time to sort of maybe mark an evolution or to, for a variety of reasons, but if anything else, to sort of essentially change their identity or almost give them a spiritual appeal too. As for the overthrow of the Yuan Dynasty, so in 1368, Chu Yuanchang successfully led the Red Turbans overthrowing the Yuan-Dynasty, marking and proclaiming himself the Hongwu Emperor, so claiming a title and a name that was not his own originally, or his given name, and established the reign as the Hongwu Emperor of the Ming Dynasty. As for once he came to power after this, so from coming from a peasant and an orphan family, or no family in fact even, it's not known if he has siblings though, but he was nonetheless an orphan, so it seems like he did not. As for his administrative reforms, Hongwu, or the Hongwu Emperor, implemented a series of administrative reforms aimed at consolidating his power and strengthening the central government. So a very common theme throughout previous Chinese dynasties, maybe less of a theme throughout the Mongol Empire, as it sort of fragmented into several successor khanates or successor states. These reforms included the establishment of a centralized bureaucracy, land redistribution to peasants, and the promotion of Confucian ideology, so sort of a Sinicization, or to China make things more Han-like within the state, but also to centralize the bureaucracy to create a more formalized government, and also centralize the authority once again through having more officials and more bureaucracy generally, but also through promoting Confucianism, which is also unity through religion. And lastly, this redistribution to peasants is also a form of populism as well, and sort of takes the power away from those sort of maybe those who might oppose his rule. As for military campaigns, Hongwu launched military campaigns to expand Ming control over territories that had been under Yuan rule. He also sought to suppress the internal rebellions and maintain stability within the empire. As for his economic policies, Hongwu implemented economic policies to stimulate agricultural production and promote trade. This agricultural production perhaps was very significant in achieving the large population that was achieved under the Ming Dynasty, and as well the large populations that are achieved in these regions today, despite alleged declining birth rates. Furthermore, he encouraged cultivation of new crops, improved irrigation systems, and supported the development of handicraft industries. So really quite perhaps a polymath in terms of administration, but also in terms of military acumen. As for his cultural patronage, despite his humble origins, Hongwu was a patron of arts and culture. He supported the development of literature and painting and calligraphy, and commissioned the construction of the grand architectural projects such as the Porcelain Tower of Nanjing, which was the capital at the time. The Porcelain Tower, beautiful sight which one day I'd like to visit. As for his later years and succession, as for his retirement and regency, in later years Hongwu grew increasingly distrustful of officials and withdrew from active governance, entrusting much of the administration to his ministers, so perhaps stepping back. He retired to the palace in Nanjing, where he spent his time studying Confucian texts and overseeing state affairs from behind the scenes. So, sort of stepping back into, as we've seen, perhaps Diocletian in Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, sort of an emperor who has perhaps all the power in the world and achieved so much. To step back is really perhaps a very, very rare and humble act. However, with succession crisis, so Hongwu's reign was marked by a succession crisis as he struggled to choose an appropriate successor among his numerous sons. So perhaps maybe that was his downfall, having too many children, or at least not being able to delineate who should rule, or whether one should even rule to begin with. Ultimately, his grandson Chu Yunwen succeeded him as the Shan-Wen Emperor in 1398, but his reign was short-lived and ended in rebellion. So, as great as perhaps the Hongwu Emperor was, maybe he could have been better in sort of crafting unity or uniformity or sort of agreement between his sons, but maybe it would have been impossible, and that cannot alone overshadow all of his other significant achievements. As for his legacy, Chu Yuanchang's reign as the Hongwu Emperor laid the foundation for the Ming Dynasty's prosperity and stability. His administrative reforms, military conquests, and cultural patronage left a lasting impact on Chinese history, shaping the course of the dynasty for centuries to come. So that is the Hongwu Emperor and the Ming Dynasty. As to discuss the content of the slides, so title we have the Hongwu Emperor and the Ming Dynasty, also known as Da Ming or Great Ming. It was the last imperial dynasty of China ruled by the Han people. This significant leader was Chu Yuan-Chang, Chu Juan-Chong as well. The empire was Great Ming. The period was 1368 to 1644 CE, but remained as a rump state with some imperial parts of the family, ruling until 1662. This is considered the early modern era in history. The modern locations include China, Mongolia, Vietnam, and Korea, but predominantly within the Chinese borders today. Million square kilometers was 6.5, which is very, very large. Our average empire of largest empires that we're covering is about 1.14, so significantly larger. And also population was quite large in this region, and also there were sedentary people, and also the incumbent empire, when they came to power, the Mongol-led Yuan-Dynasty, was no easy force to take this territory from. A million square miles was 2.51 equivalent. The percent of the world was 4.82%. That's excluding Antarctica, so quite a large portion, almost a 20th of the world. Capital was Nanjing, the original capital, as produced by the Hongwu Emperor, from 1368 to 1644. But in Beijing, in 1403, became the dominant capital. So Nanjing after 1403 became a secondary capital, and Beijing remained the capital until it was overthrown in 1644. The government was an absolute monarchy. The common languages were Mandarin, which is the official language. Other Chinese languages were also prevalent at this time. Turkey, Old Uyghur, there was still Uyghurs, the former Mongol, or not Mongols, but Khanate or barbarians who had many times invaded China previously. The Tibetan, or Mongolian, Jurchen, and other languages as well. So quite a mix during this time, but it sort of converged to Mandarin and Sinicization, or to the Han identity over its lifetime. The religion was heaven worship, predominantly Taoism, Confucianism, as promoted, for example, by the Hongwu Emperor, Buddhism, Chinese folk religion, Islam, and Roman Catholicism, or also existent in the region. Population was between 100 to 150 million, very, very large population, perhaps the largest we've covered so far. And this is perhaps due to the increased agricultural developments that had built upon the legacies of previous dynasties within the region that had developed irrigation and floodgates, or flood blocks generally. As for images, in the top left we have a seated portrait of the Ming Emperor Taichu, also known as the Hongwu Emperor, produced around 1377 by an unknown artist from the Ming Dynasty, now located in the National Palace Museum in Taipei, another place I'd be grateful to visit someday. In this region, the closest place I've been to is maybe Hong Kong and Japan, but I've never been to mainland China or Taiwan. And to the right of that, we have the imperial seal of the Ming Dynasty. Quite beautiful image. To the right of that, we have the Great Wall of China. Although the rammed earth walls of the ancient warring states were combined into a unified wall under the Qin, or that's Qin dynasty, as well as the Han dynasties, both of which we have covered. I'm grateful if you support those episodes. The vast majority of the brick and stone of the Great Wall seen today is the product of the Ming Dynasty. So the vast majority of the volume of this massive wall, I believe it goes through half the circumference of the world, even, or something like that. It was produced during this Ming Dynasty, so a huge architectural feat, perhaps in many ways permitted by this allegedly larger population. To the right of that, we have the Drum Tower and Bell Tower of Beijing, which was built by the Yuan, so showing the connection, or how it sort of built upon the previous Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, but then it was rebuilt under the Ming Dynasty, so sort of building upon that Mongol-led dynasty heritage, which perhaps we can still find the legacy of which in the regions today. Below that, we have the Forbidden City, the official imperial household of the Ming and Qin, or Qin Manchu-led Qin dynasty, from 1420 until 1924, when the Republic of China evicted Puyi from the inner court. So very, very important site, the Forbidden City, the site of the emperor for many periods during history, and also in showing the shift of the capital from Nanjing to Beijing during this time. It's interesting to note that the capital was moved closer to perhaps the wall and closer to the barbarians, as we shall see on the map, but there are many reasons why this might have made more sense from moving it from Nanjing other than changing things up. Below that, we have some important emperors. So from 1368 to 1398 was the first emperor, the Hongwu emperor. From 1402 to 1424, we have the Yongle emperor, who, as we discussed, produced many important things for the Ming Dynasty, such as moving the capital. We have the Wanli emperor from 1572 to 1620, who is the longest reigning emperor. And we have Chongchen emperor, who is from 1627 to 1644, the last emperor after the Manchu-led invasion by the Qing Dynasty, Qing. To the right of that, we have preceded by the Yuan-Dynasty, Mongol-led dynasty. We covered that in the Mongol Empire episode. It was succeeded by later Qin, the Xuan-Dynasty, the Qi Dynasty, the Southern Ming, as we saw, up until 662, and we have Macau as well. And above that, we have some important dates. Established in Nanjing in the 23rd of January, 1368. Beijing designated as the capital on the 28th of October, 1420. The fall of Beijing on the 25th of April, 1644. And the end of Southern Ming in 1662. We have also the map here of the Ming China around 1580. You can see Beijing is moved from Nanjing, the original capital, up to Beijing, closer to the perhaps formerly where the Mongol Empire was, but allegedly the barbarians, but perhaps thought the wall was sufficient. And we can see the wall is quite dense also in this region. Also the Koreans, the Goryeo Empire, for example, was for a long period a powerful empire, but nonetheless there were perhaps other reasons for moving it. But nonetheless, it was captured by the Manchu-led Qin Dynasty in 1644. We have Tibet. We've covered the Tibet Empire. We've covered the Mongol Empire, Vietnam and Laos, as well as are here, and Taiwan as well, the Philippines. So, without further ado, we will move to the next very important and fascinating empire. So, the Purépecha Empire, also known as the Tarascan Empire, but allegedly that might be a derogatory term, so we will generally refer to it as the Purépecha Empire, but it may often formally and commonly be known as the Tarascan Empire. The Purépecha Empire, also known as the Tarascan Empire, was a powerful pre-Columbian state that flourished in western Mexico from the late 14th century until the Spanish conquest in the 16th century. Therefore, we seek to find a history of its rise and fall. So for some background information first, the Purépecha Empire, also known as by the term Irechiqua, was a polity in pre-Columbian Mexico. Its territory roughly covered the geographic area in present-day Mexican state of Michoacan, as well as parts of Guanajuato and Guerrero and Jalisco, as well as at the time of the Spanish conquest, it was the second largest state in Mesoamerica after the famous Aztec Empire. It was also a contemporary to the Aztec Empire, and they fought many wars against each other. They actually, in many ways, blocked the Aztec expansion northward, and it can even be considered as the first territorial state in Mesoamerica by exerting its territorial sovereignty. So very important. So perhaps maybe even consider the first empire by maybe if a state doesn't exert its territorial sovereignty, perhaps it isn't an empire to begin with. So if Purépecha was the first to do it, perhaps it was the first empire in this region. But perhaps there were more before. Or perhaps Graham Hancock is correct and there was maybe even more civilizations before this. So the second largest in Mesoamerica at the time of the Spanish conquest. It was also known by the Tarascan Empire, an exonym often considered a pejorative by the Purépecha people. So generally is not considered respectful to use. So, rise of the Purépecha Empire. So, foundation, the Purépecha Empire was founded by the Purépecha people, also known as the Tarascans, who inhabited the region around the Lake Pátzcuaro in present-day Michoacán, Mexico. The exact date of the empire's foundation, however, is uncertain, but it likely emerged in the late 14th century. As for the expansion, under the leadership of their ruler, Tarikuri, and his successors, the Purépecha gradually expanded their territory, becoming the second largest in Mesoamerica, through military conquest and diplomatic alliances, so able to use both the carrot and the stick, as they call it. They subjugated neighboring indigenous groups and established a network of fortified cities and settlements across western Mexico. So as we shall see, some absolutely fascinating architectural sites were produced by the Purépecha Empire, and showing sort of more of a predisposition to a sedentary lifestyle as opposed to a nomadic lifestyle, as we see perhaps, for example, the Mongol Empire. As for political organization, the Tarascan Empire was characterized by centralized geopolitical structure with a hereditary monarchy. Lord Blackstone, in Commentaries of the Laws of England, says there's either hereditary or elective monarchies. This would be the former, hereditary monarchy. Tarikuri and subsequent rulers such as Hirapan and Tangaxuan II, as who will highlight in a specific biography, Tangaxuan, in a specific biography, the second wielded significant power and authority over their subjects. As for cultural achievements of the Purépecha Empire, the Purépecha developed a sophisticated civilization with impressive artistic, architectural, and technological achievements. They are renowned for their distinctive ceramic ware, as we shall highlight later to come, their metallurgy, as we have a specific image to come, and urban planning as well, as we shall see, as manifested by their architecture, for example. As evidenced by their monumental site of Sinsansan, which served as the empire's capital. Pardon me, these pronunciations are very, very difficult for me, but bear with me. So as for the zenith of the Purépecha Empire, so the economic prosperity. So the Purépecha Empire prospered through trade, agriculture, and tribute from conquered territories. They controlled key trade routes linking highlands of central Mexico to the Pacific coast, so facilitating significant trade throughout the region, allowing for greater population through economic prosperity. Facilitating exchange of goods such as obsidian, textiles, and luxury items. Perhaps a tangent I was thinking, imagine if you the first time seeing obsidian would just be such a mind-blowing experience. I could imagine. I don't know if one has seen obsidian before. It's absolutely a beautiful thing, and if one doesn't know the chemical nature or what it is or where it comes from, it's real. I could imagine it being quite fascinating. As for military strength, the Purépecha maintained a formidable military force, perhaps the first to exert military or territorial sovereignty against the Aztecs. Equipped with weapons such as obsidian-bladed swords, copper axes, and wooded shields. One of my favorite games going back was Guild Wars. The obsidian armor was the greatest. They successfully repelled incursions from rival states, including the Aztec Empire, which sought to extend its influence into western Mexico. So fighting against the formidable Aztec force as well. An important empire we'll highlight. The Aztecs were one of the first empires, along with Carthage, that I studied as a child. My father actually suggested those two empires I studied. As for their cultural flourishing, so the Purépecha made significant contributions to Mesoamerican culture, particularly in the fields of art, religion, and architecture. They built impressive pyramids, as we will see, massive architectural marvels requiring enormous amounts of energy, religion, and architecture. They built impressive pyramids, sculptures, temples, and palaces adorned with intricate carvings and sculptures reflecting their cosmology and belief system. Also, the cosmology, allegedly, it was extremely sophisticated at this time. In large part, I think it's largely a lost science today because there's so many lights, at least in my current location, Toronto. I don't think I've seen a star in a long time. As for, however, the decline and fall of the Purépecha Empire, starting with the Spanish conquest, and ending with the Spanish conquest. So the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés in the early 16th century posed a significant threat to the Purépecha Empire. So Hernán Cortés was one of the first sort of figures I studied under the Aztec Empire, an empire we'll soon cover. Despite initially maintaining their independence through diplomacy and military resistance, the Purépechans were ultimately overwhelmed by the superior weaponry and tactics of the Spanish. There's a great history of that in the earlier portions of Guns, Germs, and Steel, of sort of how the advantage the Spanish had over Mesoamerica at the time. The hypothesis posed in Guns, Germs, and Steel is, why was it that the Spanish conquered those of Mesoamerica, not vice versa? And it wasn't because people were genetically different or anything like that. It was that the people in Europe had a higher population density, so they developed more germs, etc., but also more production just by higher population density, just by virtue of the region. So when they reached, in large part, it was diseases, but also they had armored horses. Imagine being they did not have horses in Mesoamerica, so not only horses arriving, but armored horses must have been a terrifying sight. Furthermore, as for epidemic diseases, like other indigenous societies in the Americas, the Purépechans were devastated by epidemic diseases introduced by the Spanish, such as smallpox, measles, and influenza. These diseases caused widespread mortality and destabilized the empire's social and political structures. So very, very sort of exacerbating the way things played out. Perhaps if the diseases had been going the other way, maybe the military advantage of the Spanish might not have been so great. Another great book and also movie that inspired me is War of the Worlds, where this sort of superior military force comes in, these aliens, and there's nothing humans can really do, but it's the common flu that kills them, or the common cold, I believe, that kills them. So nonetheless, the germs are very important, and perhaps even population density, and perhaps it is okay to spread germs every once in a while to build immunity. But perhaps it's done over generations and not within a lifetime. But I propose that there is some development of immunity within a lifetime through nurture. So further, as for internal strife, further exacerbating this, internal divisions and power struggles weakened the Purépechan Empire in the face of Spanish aggression. Rival factions vied for control over the imperial throne, further undermining the empire's ability to resist further foreign conquest, thus allowing for colonial subjugation, unfortunately. By the 1530s, the Purépechan Empire had been largely subdued by the Spanish, or the Tarascan Empire then called, who established colonial rule over the region. Many Purépechans nobles were coerced into converting to Christianity, and indigenous populations were subjected to forced labor and exploitation by Spanish encomiendas, or especially conquistadors. But nonetheless, a poor history, in a period of history for the Mexican tapestry of sort of subjection and oppression. As for the legacy of the Purépecha Empire, despite its eventual conquest and subjugation, the Spanish, by the Spanish, the Purépecha Empire left a lasting legacy in the history and culture of Western Mexico. Its artistic achievements, architectural monuments, and cultural traditions continue to be celebrated by modern-day descendants of the Purépecha people and the population, global population as well. So despite the subjugation and the oppression perhaps inflicted upon the Purépechan people by the Spanish conquest, these monuments, for example, that they built could not be destroyed, at least without great extreme difficulty. So some still achievement that cannot be taken. So as to highlight a specific leader, so Tangaxuan the second. Tangaxuan the second. So one of the most significant rulers of the Purépecha Empire was Tangaxuan, or Tangaxuan, also known as, of the Purépecha Empire. Tangaxuan II, therefore, we'll seek to find a biography of his life. So his full name, we have, I practice this, Sim Cha Tangaxuan II, who died on the February 14th, on Valentine's Day of 1530. It was not perhaps Valentine's Day for them at the time, though, however. And he was the last Kanzochi, or monarch of the Purépecha Empire. So he's the last of the monarchs of the Purépecha Empire, from 1520 to 1530, reigning for 10 years. He was baptized by Francisco when his realm made a peace treaty with Hernan Cortez, so sort of perhaps convinced or forced into a different religion or foreign religion, and he was executed by the burning by Nuno Beltran de Guzman on February 14th, 1530. So pretty brutal day to the burning of the last kings, or the last monarchs of the Purépecha empires, by Nuno Beltran de Guzman. There's now a gangster known as Guzman. It's sort of a brutal connection to make, or a bloody connection to make. As for the early life of Tangaxuan II, starting with his birth and lineage. So Tangaxuan II, also known as Sin Panda Curare, was born into a noble ruling family of the Purépecha Empire, likely in the late 15th century. He belonged to the Purépecha ethnic group, which inhabited the region around the Purépecha of the Lake Pátzcuaro in present-day Michoacán, Mexico. A place I'd be grateful to visit. I have been fortunate to visit many regions in Mexico, but I don't believe I've been to this region. As for his education and training, from a young age, Tangaxuan II would have received education and training becoming, or befitting, of a member of the royal family. He likely learned about governance, warfare, religion, and cultural tradition from the Purépecha. So, as of the ruling family, likely the best education that could be provided to him. As for his ascension to the throne, Tangaxuan II ascended to the throne of the Purépecha Empire following the death or abdication of his predecessor, possibly his father or elder relative. So it seemed to be a relatively streamlined transition of power for him. His coronation would have been accompanied by elaborate rituals and ceremonies, reaffirming his divine right of rule. So a absolute, or a monarch who also is a god, as we saw perhaps with some of our earliest Egyptian empires, starting with the Old Kingdom of Egypt. As for the reign as Tangaxuan II, starting with his consolidation of power, upon assuming the throne, Tangaxuan II would have faced the task of consolidating his power and asserting control over his empire. He likely relied on the support of influential nobles, priests, and military commanders to maintain stability and unity within the realm. So these are sort of common attributes of many of the Purépecha emperors that likely Tangaxuan II manifested. As for military campaigns, Tangaxuan II also likely conducted military campaigns to defend the empire's borders and expand its territories. He may have led expeditions against rival states and repelled incursions and external threats, such as the Aztec Empire, which had fought against the Purépecha Empire many times previously. As for empire or nomadic tribes from the north, and also fighting from neighboring, nomadic tribes from the north. So, for example, he might have fought battles against the Aztecs and nomadic tribes from the north. As we had seen, the Purépecha Empire was one of the first to exert territorial sovereignty in Mesoamerica. Also being the second largest, it also would have been perhaps a target for some. As for infrastructure and urban development, like his predecessors, Tangaxuan II would have overseen the construction of monumental architectural projects, including pyramids, temples, palaces, and fortifications, as we shall see. These structures served as symbols of imperial power and religious devotion, as well as centers of administrative and ritualistic activity. As for his cultural patronage, Tangaxuan II likely patronized the arts in the positive sense, religion and cultural traditions as well of his people, promoting the development of sculpture, pottery, painting, music, dance, and literature. So perhaps in the Leviathan by Hobbes, perhaps if you have a monarch, they're sort of more likely to be aligned with their people because they don't really have, or if they are secure with their throne, they don't really have a reason to conflict with them in terms. So perhaps it's likely that he really did want to promote the religion simultaneously with the state because it was necessarily in his best interest, as it was for many of the other Purépecha emperors. As for his legacy and enduring influence, so Tangaxuan's reign contributed to the prosperity, stability, and cultural flourishing of the Purépecha Empire before the Spanish invasion. During a pivotal period in its history, his achievements in governance, warfare, and cultural patronage likely left a lasting legacy, or at least manifested many of the significant achievements of the Purépecha Empire before it was defeated, that continued to influence subsequent generations of Purépecha peoples today and within Mexico even today. However, despite its eventual conquest and subjugation, the Tarascan or Purépecha Empire by the Spanish in the 16th century, Tangaxuan II's memory and accomplishments endured as a testament to the resilience and sophistication of indigenous civilizations in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. His name lives in the annals of Purépecha history as one of the most illustrious and revered monarchs, despite his unfortunate end. So as mentioned before, he was baptized by Francisco when his realm made a peace treaty with Hernan Cortes, so they endeavored to create peace. Perhaps he even went to a foreign religion to sort of subdue the threat. But nonetheless, he was executed by burning by Nuno Beltran de Guzman on February 14th, 1530, after the fall of the Aztec Empire and sending emissaries to the Spanish victors. So the Aztec Empire fell first. He sent emissaries, and then nonetheless he was captured as well and burned as well, unfortunately. As for the content of the slides, so that is the fascinating, in my opinion, Purépecha Empire and Tangaxuan II. So images in the top left, we have Tangaxuan II being executed, a painting by Juan O'Gorman and he was burned by, once again, Nuno Beltran de Guzman. To the right, we have the archaeological site of Tsinsun-san, which is the capital of Iriquechua, which was the other name for the Purépecha Empire. To the right of that, we have a Purépecha incense burner showing the deity of Tlaloc, their headdress as well, from 1350 to 1521 CE. Below that, we have a pre-Columbian coyote statue attributed to the Purépecha culture, likely a representation of the coyote god, Otsimangari. It has a height of 43.5 centimeters, or 17 inches. It's quite tall, actually, over a foot. To the right of that, we have the Chakmul, which is allegedly a reclined individual, perhaps a dead soldier giving some prayer to the gods or some contribution to the gods, perhaps. Produced by Cultures of the West in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico, a place I believe I have been fortunate to visit. But I do not believe I've seen this specific site, that specific, the Chakmul. Below that, we have the islands in Lake Pátzcuaro, viewed from the top of the Janchitzo Island. To the right of that, we have the fourth Yakate pyramid in the south end of the line of the Tsinsun-san, great archaeological achievements that perhaps maybe might have a connection to perhaps Graham Hancock. Perhaps maybe there was some insights they achieved from an earlier civilization. Perhaps these might be evidence, or perhaps they were just really outstanding achievements for people at that time, and a huge achievement in terms of resources, especially given the population. As for additional information, we have the significant leader. We'll start with the titles. Also known as Iriquechua, or the Tarascan Empire. It was the second largest state in Mesoamerica at the time of the Spanish conquest. The significant leader was Tsinsincha, or Tangaxuan II. The period was likely starting in circa, that means approximately, 1300 to 1530 CE, known as the post-classical period. The modern location is within the borders of Mexico. Million square kilometers was 0.075, so quite a bit smaller than our average empires, maybe. But for example, we included Sparta and Athens, for example, in some of our Greek city-states, and as well the intermediary period. So this one's important to include, especially considering it's the second largest of Mesoamerica at the time of the Spanish conquest. So it should be covered, and it's important also as it's a unique history and a unique region of the world. And nonetheless, it was also, warfare was fought over the state, so it wasn't an easy area of the world to rule over. Million square kilometers was 0.303 equivalent. Percent of the world would be 0.06%, excluding Antarctica. The capital was Sinsan. The government was a monarchy. Common languages were Purépecha, Matlatzinca, and Tukeyeche. Religion was polytheism. Population was likely from between 500,000 to 1.5 million, so still quite large, but it may have even been larger, but nonetheless it wasn't maybe not as large as some of our other empires, for example, the Ming Dynasty, which this empire is paired with. As for some of the Kanzonji, who are the emperors from 1300 to 1350, we have Tariakuri, who was the founder of the Purépecha Empire, likely, and 1520 to 1530 was Tangaxuan II, who was the last we highlighted in this specific biography. And the empire was succeeded by New Spain, an important empire we'll also highlight. Here we have a map. Here we have the Purépecha Empire in green. We have the Sinsansan, the capital and the important site with all these great monuments, which I'd very much like to visit someday. And then also in the gray, dark gray, here we have the Aztec Empire, the largest empire in Mesoamerica, and its capital, Tenochtitlan. And also, obviously, the Spanish would come and, unfortunately, conquer both, and very significant disease, but maybe it was inevitable, unfortunately. Oh, and as well, we have some metallurgy. We have some bells and, for example, looks like a cutting tool as well, and perhaps decorations for perhaps beauty as well. So that is Tangaxuan and the Purépecha Empire. As for a comparison between Chu Yuan-Chang and Tsin-Tsin-Cha Tongxuan II in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives. So Chu Yuan-Chang of the Ming Dynasty and Tangaxuan II of the Purépecha Empire were both significant rulers in their respective regions and eras. But they ruled over vastly different societies and faced distinct challenges, as we shall see. Therefore, we seek to compare and contrast them. So, some of their similarities. So, Chu Yuan-Chang was the founder of an empire, or perhaps to start, this is actually certainly a difference. So, Chu Yuan-Chang and Tangaxuan II but played pivotal roles in that one founded the empire and the other was unfortunately was at its ultimate decline. So, but maybe for Tangaxuan II, it was still the peak of the empire, so you got to see its greatest extent before the Spanish invasion. But Yuan-Shan, who founded an empire, or the Hongwu emperor, although a great achievement, maybe didn't get to see the greatest extent or achievement of the empire. As for similarity, they had centralized authorities. Both rulers exercised centralized authority over their realms, implementing administrative reforms and strengthening their control. Chu Yuanshang established a centralized bureaucracy in China, while Tangaxuan II maintained control of Purépecha nobility and territories through his royal court. Both were absolute monarchs and hereditary as well. But Chu Yuanshang was the first of his hereditary line, however, coming from an orphan. As for military leadership, both rulers demonstrated military prowess and strategic acumen in expanding and defending their empires. Chu Yuanshang led successful military campaigns against the Mongols and the Yuan-Dynasty, Mongol-led Yuan-Dynasty, and formed his own empire, while Tangaxuan II conducted military expeditions against perhaps the Aztecs and northern indigenous peoples, but as well as a formidable attempt at defending against New Spain, which unfortunately, or fortunately for them, ultimately led to Spanish victory. As for some differences, starting with their cultural context, Chu Yuanshang ruled over China, a highly developed civilization relatively for the time, with a long history of centralized governance. So we've covered many, many dynasties already that have ruled over this region and developed the land. And as well, there was sophisticated culture relatively at the time, and technological innovation, perhaps the most advanced empire we've covered to date, and will likely, certainly. Perhaps, though, maybe some of our comparable ones in the Middle East might be equally as developed scientifically or more developed in certain areas, but in terms of population, this is perhaps the largest we've seen so far. As for the Mongols, and they also led successful military campaigns against the Mongols. But however, for Tangaxuan II was, on the other hand, ruled over the Purépecha Empire, a Mesoamerican civilization, the second largest Mesoamerican civilization at the time of the Spanish conquest, characterized by a distinct cultural tradition such as pyramid building, which is perhaps a very, very significant architectural achievement, and perhaps seen as comparable to the construction of the Great Wall, as many even of Yuanshang's predecessors continued to do. So both of them were very, very significant in their architectural achievements, even relative to the vast, vast majority of other states at this time and across the world and throughout history. Furthermore, the Tangaxuan II ruled over a polytheistic religion, whereas Chu Yuanshang promoted Confucianism predominantly, but still ruled over a generally religiously diverse group. As well, they both were in favor of the arts and were patrons of the arts generally in their people, despite perhaps not necessarily being incentivized to do so, and maybe doing so to strengthen their own authority or or create more prosperity within their own states. They also both engaged quite a bit of trade, but for example, Chu Yuanshang's, or the Hongwu emperor, perhaps was more outside the state. However, maybe more of his successors would, for example, use the Silk Road a lot and maritime trade, whereas Tangaxuan II would do significant trade, for example, between the Pacific and then more the eastern portions of the state, so more within the state. But perhaps there was trades with the Aztec or the other northern indigenous tribes as well. As for their geopolitical situation, Chu Yuanshang contended with neighboring states and external threats, such as the Mongols and Japanese pirates, while also overseeing maritime expedition projects and Chinese power abroad, but largely also produced by his successors. Tangaxuan II faced regional rivals such as the Aztec Empire and navigating a complex political landscape in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, not to mention the formidable force of the Spanish invasions. As for their religious background, as alluded to, Chu Yuanshang was initially a Buddhist monk before becoming a military leader and emperor, while Tangaxuan II likely adhered to indigenous religious beliefs and rituals associated with the Tarascan pantheon, which included gods such as Kuri Queri and Sharatanga, or Purépecha pantheon, pardon me. But it must be noted perhaps that Chu Yuanshang actually left his religion. He was a Buddhist monk. Then he would come to be lead the Red Turban Rebellion. So perhaps not a very perhaps religious thing necessarily under Buddhism. But then he would then promote Confucianism later in his life. So perhaps changing even religions, which Tangaxuan II sort of promoted the Purépecha polytheism throughout, which in many ways was tied to him as well as a divine ruler. As for their legacy and impact, Chu Yuanshang's reign left a lasting impact on Chinese history, shaping the course of the Ming Dynasty and influencing subsequent dynasties. His administrative reforms, cultural patronage, and military conquest contributed to the prosperity of China and prosperity and stability of China, despite perhaps some of the succession disputes amongst his many sons. Tangaxuan II's legacy is perhaps less well documented, but is celebrated among the Purépecha people as their last ruler and who led or endeavored to defend against or was tragically defeated by the Spanish, for his role in the expansion for a period and flourishing before the Spanish of the Purépecha Empire as well. And his achievements in governance, warfare, and cultural patronage continue to be remembered in the traditions and folklore of modern-day Micochan, Mexico, or also amongst the descendants of the Purépecha people, and Mexico broadly, and I think should be done more on a global scale today. So I hope and I'm grateful for you for supporting this episode, for also appreciating perhaps this less researched empire. So thank you very much for watching, in my opinion, this very, very fascinating episode on the Ming Empire and the Purépecha Empire. This is Ages of Empires. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. I'm very grateful for your support in this series where we're covering all the world's greatest empires, and I'd be very, very grateful if you continue to provide it. Thank you so much.